Good afternoon, and welcome to the Middle East Forum's webinar and podcast series, Israel Insider with Ashley Perry. I'm Stacey Roman, and I will be moderating this discussion today. We're pleased to have Ashley Perry, advisor to the Middle East Forum's Israel office, join us here each week to update us on all the events going on in Israel. Mr. Perry will be giving us a briefing on current Israeli affairs for 15 minutes, then open it up for questions. Should you wish to ask a question, please use the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen to type your question. Now, with no further ado, I'll turn the discussion over to Mr. Ashley Perry.
Thank you very much, Stacey, and good evening from Israel. Well, there was a bit of a set to, for want of better words, today with the US State Department. A deputy spokesperson for the State Department basically related to a recently released report by the IDF, which said that it's a very strong likelihood that it was someone from the IDF, the Israeli side, who killed Shireen Abu Akleh, the Palestinian American or Palestinian journalist with American citizenship, who was killed a number of months ago in a shootout in Jenin. The interesting thing about this is just really to show where Israeli society is. Over the last few months, we've been talking a lot about the Iran deal. We've talked quite a lot about the Palestinian issue. We've talked about all different things. And you did not see the reaction in Israel from the leaders to any of these issues publicly, openly, that you did on this, because the spokesperson basically said that we are trying to push Israel to change its rules of engagement. And anyone who knows anything about Israeli society knows that the IDF is a sacred cow. For those who aren't aware, most Israelis at the age of 18, whether male or female, go to the army, with some exceptions, the most prominent being the Arab community and the ultra-Orthodox community. So, you know, everyone, or not everyone, but most Israelis have someone in the army. Most Israelis have done the army. Most Israelis understand what it is to be in the army. And those who have been in combat units, especially who have, who have experienced the fog of war, who have been in even gunfights, understand that, you know, what happens there is not something that should be poured over in diplomatic events, in international fora. And obviously, there's a continued call for some antagonists to Israel to even arrest or have some IDF soldiers prosecuted. Now, it's clear from the Israeli investigation, first of all, the fact that they came out and admitted it should also be applauded to a certain extent, because it would have been easy for them just to ignore it and hope the issue would have gone away. But they came out and said that the likelihood is that it came from an IDF side. But the idea that it was intentional was shot down. There were clear a misunderstanding, perhaps even misidentification. But what people should understand outside, and those who've never served in combat units, who have never been under fire, is it's very hard to see who's who. You're being shot at. Apparently, in that particular operation, there were terrorists shooting from all different directions. So it's very hard to sort of sit and go through all these different channels and decide, should I shoot, should I engage? You know, those who are pontificating in, you know, far-off foreign ministries should really understand what the Israeli soldiers who are going to arrest terrorists, those who sent already murderers into Israeli cities and could continue to do so, have to understand what these soldiers are going through, bullets whizzing past their ears as they have to respond in time. They can't wait. They have to understand, and Israeli rules of engagement are pretty strict. You know, you can't just shoot at someone. You have to get permission. You first have to shout in their direction, then you have to shoot in the air, and then maybe a non-lethal shot, and only then you're allowed to. So there's actually probably many armies around the world have less strict rules of engagement. So the idea that, you know, there'd be a call, even from our closest friends and allies in the US, for a change in the rules of engagement was immediately shot down by Prime Minister Yair Lapid, was shot down by Defense Minister Benny Gantz. And again, it really just shows, of all the issues, the one you do not touch in Israeli society. And that's why you have these prominent figures who are coming out and openly attacking those voices in the State Department and perhaps elsewhere, who are calling or pushing, as they claim, for Israel to change its rules of engagement. So that was quite an interesting moment, considering everything that's going on with the engagement between Israel and the US on the return to the JCPOA and other issues. I promised tonight that I would talk a little bit about the campaign. We've spoken quite a lot about it over the last few weeks and how it hasn't really got going. Well, a lot of people expected September to be the month that things are moving, and certainly this week is probably the most intense week as far as the parties are closing, with different workers, employees for the party, getting their communications people, taking polls. I mean, probably these have already been done, but really closing the gaps to get going in the next few days. On the 15th will be the closing of the party lists. In other words, the party lists will be handed over to the Electoral Commission, and that's it. They cannot be changed after that. They cannot be added to. If someone drops out, the next person on the list just moves one place forward. What we are seeing, as we see in most elections in Israel, is really two stages. We see the opening sort of stages where parties are sort of trying to identify themselves a little bit, but not really hard-hitting issues. And then usually as we get closer to the elections themselves, some of the issues, how each party differentiates itself, who they decide to pick a fight with, et cetera, really becomes clearer. And we're already starting to see some of this taking shape. Now, again, there's two sorts of ways that Israeli parties will try and run these campaigns. The first is you try and differentiate yourself between those closest to you on the political map. Obviously, if you're on the right wing, then you have to try and say why you should vote for us in Likud, or you should vote for us in Religious Zionist Party, or even Shas, or maybe some of the other smaller parties which are flirting with the electoral thresholds. Another way, and obviously that the same thing happens on the left. Another way to sort of differentiate yourself is by attacking someone on the other side, making yourself a sort of enemy. And sometimes this works for both parties. We've seen in the past Israel Beiteinu and Shas. Sometimes it was even coordinated, other times less so. They like to attack each other's constituents, I should say, and the issues which are most important to them. We saw in the past Shas basically claim that any sort of conversion reform leads to sort of fax marriages where you just stand under chuppah and you get a fax that you're married, sort of mocking the way people are would be converted under Yisrael Beiteinu's suggested reforms of the conversion system. Obviously would hurt them because the videos mocked, people with Russian accents, which is obviously a large constituency for Yisrael Beiteinu. Yisrael Beiteinu would then shoot back against the Haredi way of life, et cetera, and sometimes that actually worked both of them because the more controversial campaigns will get a lot more play in the media, and it will really speak to their base, which will ensure that they come out to vote. So those are sort of the two ways, and I'm just going to give a little bit of an overview on some of the parties that we've noticed certain things over the last week. First of all, again, there are efforts to join Meretz and Labour. We're talking about the two most left-wing parties. If you remove let's say on the Zionist or the mostly Jewish map, Meretz is to the left of Labour. Meretz has just had a leadership battle, and Zahava Galon, a former leader of Meretz, has won that leadership battle, won it very convincingly against Yair Golan. And the first thing she tried to do, and has been trying to do ever since, is trying to convince Merav Michaeli, the leader of the Labour Party, to join. Merav Michaeli has said for a long time, and I know this personally, that she has no intention of joining. She sees her party as having something unique. Her goals and her campaign will be around sort of trying to return as much of a social welfare state, the social net that she believes has been lost to more capitalist ideas, more right-wing economic ideas over the years. And she believes that is the answer to some of the issues affecting Israelis, especially with the cost of living going up. And she believes that that makes her unique, and there's no reason for her to join. She was buoyed after the last elections when she was polling 4 or 5, and again flirting with the electoral threshold. And in the end, she got, I think, 8 or 9 seats. So there's a certain feeling that she can do the same, and there's no reason to partner with Meretz. There's enough votes on the left to go around. Meretz is polling around 5, which means it's only 1 seat away from potentially falling below the electoral threshold. Yair Lapid, who obviously is the leader of the left, center-left bloc, is very keen for the two parties to get together, because this elections could really hinge on if any party doesn't pass the electoral threshold, that could give the other bloc a major advantage. If a right-wing party doesn't pass the electoral threshold, that's pretty much the end of any chances of Bibi passing 61. And even though Lapid is quite away, according to every single poll, from 61, certainly his chances will not be made any easier if Meretz do fall under that threshold. So Lapid is offering all sorts of goodies to the two leaders, especially Labour, trying to give perhaps Labour members places on his list, which would mean to expand the number of Labour MKs in the next Knesset. As I said, at this point in time, Merav Michaeli is resisting. My money would be on the two parties running separate, but I guess it just comes down to how generous Yair Lapid is, or how desperate he is, to ensure that there's no chance that any party on his bloc will fall below the electoral threshold. The National Unity Party, led by Benny Gantz, held its inaugural event. It released its list. It was the first party to release its list. As we know, the leadership is Benny Gantz at the top, Gideon Sa'ar, former leader of New Hope, which has folded his party into Benny Gantz's, and is now being joined by former Chief of Staff, IDF Chief of Staff, Gadi Eisenkot. Gadi Eisenkot, as we spoke about, hasn't really given them the bump. Maybe in the days after he joined, they maybe got one more seat, but we've seen that return to pretty much Yesh Atid. Both of them are fighting over similar audiences. They put out a very interesting list. It's really a sort of, there's some center-left voices, there's some far-right voices, it's really sort of all over the map. But that is what Benny Gantz is claiming is their greatest strength, that they're able to unite and also be that bridge between the two blocs. Benny Gantz is claiming that he is the best, he has the best chance of being prime minister from that bloc, and he's making the case to centrists or center-left over Yair Lapid that only he could form a government, because everyone will sit with him eventually. So he's saying either there are 3 options after these elections: either Likud, national religious, ultra-Orthodox government. The second option is we go to new elections, and the third one is a national unity government led by Benny Gantz. So that is the case that he's trying to make. They're not really talking about issues, because there are very few issues which unite such a disparate party. So it's really just trying to make the case that Benny Gantz is the best place to lead. And in fact, the slogan of the party is Acharav, which is a play on, in the Israeli army, commanders or officers are taught Acharai, after me. They're supposed to lead their soldiers into combat. And that's a very well-known phrase in Israel because of that. So now the idea is after him. So that's again, it lacks issues, it lacks policies, but that's the case they're trying to make. Moving across the spectrum to Shas. Shas, again, is the Sephardi ultra-Orthodox party, but as opposed to its Ashkenazi counterpart, the majority of people who vote for Shas are not ultra-Orthodox. They appeal not just to the ultra-Orthodox, but especially the so-called underprivileged, this is what they would themselves call them, Sephardim, Jews from the Middle East, North Africa, and those who are traditional, perhaps religious or even secular, who have respect for religion, who buy into this idea that Aryeh Deri cares about them, sees them, as opposed to all other parties. In the last elections, or one of the last elections, They talked about the shkufim, the invisible ones, saying that this is, that there's a lot of talk in Israel about the first Israel and second Israel, and there's a lot of people who like to play into that. Aryeh Deri does very well off that, and that's why they are polling it between 9 and 10. So that is the issue, especially with the rising cost of living, and many below the poverty line are suffering. Shas, as they always do, they talk social issues, they appeal to the wider Sephardim before elections, but usually after elections, they then revert to being almost purely an ultra-Orthodox party. Going back to their Ashkenazi counterparts, United Torah Judaism, we talked about this last couple of weeks, there was this potential split between the Hasidic and non-Hasidic parts. As I suggested and predicted, they found a way to figure it out and work together, because there was very little chance of both wings being able to pass the electoral threshold if they ran separately. Their campaign is usually just the rabbis say you should vote for United Torah Judaism. We're bringing we're coming back to power because they've been outside and the yeshivot have suffered, and many of the payments that the ultra-Orthodox community get from the government have suffered. So that's a case that they'll be making, trying to drive as many of their people out as possible. Yisrael Be'eteinu is going to release its list next week. It's going to have its real campaign launched then. At the moment, Avigdor Lieberman is trying to make the case that he's done a good job as finance minister. Many would suggest he has, many would suggest he hasn't, but really he's trying to play on the macro level that inflation has been good, and he under him, and he's compared around the world to how many other countries have dealt with the cost of living and the rise in costs of gas and other commodities. And Israel's pretty much done quite well. But at the end of the day, when the people are suffering, when they feel a pain, it's a very difficult case to make that everything is good. But what I think we will see, especially in the second stage, is more sort of attack on the sort of adversaries, which are the Arab political leaders and the ultra-Orthodox political leaders. So I think that will certainly be split into two stages. Another interesting party is the Religious Zionist Party, led by Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir. They come together after weeks of negotiations back and forth. Clearly, Itamar Ben-Gvir is the more popular of the two leaders, and basically, at this point in time, their case to the public is simply: you know what we are, you know what we talk about, you know what our issues are, you know what we promise. This is who we are, and please vote for us. It just sort of shows that even a deeply ideological party as the Religious Zionists still hasn't quite figured out what it's going to say, what is going to be its policies. I'm sure there will be policies along the way, but the major overall message to the public is: you know what we are, what we stand for. If you want to see us in the next Knesset, vote for us. So that's a sort of breakdown of some of the the campaigns at the early stages, what they're saying, who they're attacking, who they're aligning with, and what the central messages are, at least in this first stage of campaigning. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you so much. So the first question we have in is gear shift. Carrie Hillebrand asks, could you comment on the report in the Times of Israel that the U.S. is suspending the JCPOA negotiations with Iran? And an anonymous attendee follows up. The renewal of the JCPOA seems to have been something of an on again, off again item. And can you comment on that?
Well, it's very difficult to know, because these negotiations are, they're trying to keep them secret. So I don't really have any more insight except for what's in the media. But it does seem that there seems to be some walking back of a commitment, or at least a lack of mention in the drafts of Iran objecting or making it, an issue for the agreement of whether Iran would stop the IAEA probe into some of its facilities, which show traces of uranium, which were certainly not catalogued and not mentioned. Iran has said on many occasions they certainly haven't dropped it vocally and publicly, but it was suggested by a lot of people who read the text that it wasn't mentioned in the latest text, and the Iranians didn't bring it back into the text once it was removed. But it seems as if there may be some movement back on that by the Iranians. Perhaps the Iranians are simply just trying to play for time. There was talk today that the Iranians certainly have enough uranium for a nuclear weapon. That was talked about quite a lot in Israel today. And there's a disagreement amongst Israeli intelligence services whether they should support a return or not, with Amman, which is the IDF intelligence, basically saying that it's probably the best, if Iran has enough uranium for a bomb, this is probably the best way to prevent them, at least for now. Whereas the Mossad are against it. They said that we've seen enough of cheating in the past, that if Iran has the know-how at this point in time, no agreement is really going to get rid of that. So everything will just be temporary and basically left up to trust towards the Iranians. So there's a bit of disagreement. It does seem that Iran are either on the cusp of enough uranium for a nuclear weapon or have already enough. Either way, it's certainly interesting to see where we go from here, but there does seem to be a little bit of a step backwards from the Iranians, but we've seen that many, many times before.
Thank you. Stuart Broad asks, do you believe that this step back on the U.S. part is because the Biden administration does not wish to harm the election chances of Yair Lapid, and thus will quickly move to do so after the election, assuming that such an act would not alter coalition negotiations to favor Benjamin Netanyahu?
I don't see it. I know that there is that possibility, and that's something that some in the pro-Netanyahu camp have already started to put out. Some are even claiming that Yair Lapid, if the US does take a step back from this, that Yair Lapid will try and make hay from this during the election campaign, how he was able to stop it and Netanyahu wasn't able to stop the original JCPOA. I don't think the Biden administration will necessarily take that into account. I'm not naive to think that there's never any politics in it, but it seems like it's gone a long way. The Europeans are involved. Honestly, would they prefer Yair Lapid to remain prime minister? Probably. I don't think that's too much of a secret. But I think if there was an agreement on the table, the Americans have shown enough eagerness that they would like to sign on to it.
Thank you so much. Sandra Bellestrino asks, do you think Israel will continue the campaign of containment in Syria, or do you think the IDF will try to deal a coup de grace to Iranian military expansion in that territory?
Oh, it will certainly, Israel is certainly going to continue doing everything it can, basically to prevent Iran from setting up a base right on Israel's border, and also for the smuggling of game-changing weapons back and forth across the Syrian-Lebanese border to Hezbollah, which are obviously, a very close ally and a major tentacle of the Iranian octopus sort of in the region. So Israel will continue doing that. It seems to be doing day in, day out. I think it bombed the runway of the Aleppo airport, I believe it was yesterday. And these sorties are going on, if not daily, that every couple of days, and I think that will continue.
Understood. Anthony Field asks, in the UK Parliament yesterday, Michael Fabricant, MP, told the Foreign Office Minister that now is the time to move the British Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Do you agree?
Well, of course, in Israel, most people agree that all embassies should be put in Jerusalem. Jerusalem is our capital. It's not in dispute too much in Israel, obviously. There are some on the far left who will disagree, but Jerusalem is the seat of government. It's where every foreign government official will come and meet our head of state, meet our prime minister, meet our ministers in Jerusalem. It's not in Tel Aviv. So Israel certainly would welcome any talk of that. I personally don't see that happening. I'm sure there are some voices, as there are in many other countries, and it's good that this question was raised in Parliament, but the British certainly will not be high up on the list of those countries who will move their embassy from Tel Aviv, where it currently is, to Jerusalem anytime soon.
Thank you. Murray Feldman asks, what is Lapid and Gantz's position on the defense of Judea and Samaria?
On the defense of Judea and Samaria, I'm going to make an assumption what that means, because it's quite a broad question. Because if we're talking about defending Israeli citizens there, then I think everybody is pretty strong on that. And that's why the army is there, not just obviously for the residents of Judea and Samaria, also for over the Green Line in Israel, sort of sovereign state of Israel as well. I'm assuming the question probably relates more to how much Israeli settlement activity they would like to see. Well, obviously, being center-left parties, they're obviously not as gung-ho on building or enlarging Israeli communities over the Green Line in Judea and Samaria, as some on the right would be. But we certainly have seen some building, certainly not as much as some on the right would like to see. But let's not forget that when the right was in power, there was also limited building, as there has been for a number of years. So I think, you can show this statistic, that statistic. I think over the last year, it hasn't certainly been any less building in Israeli settlements in Judea and Samaria than there was under the previous Netanyahu government.
Speaking of the Netanyahu government, Carrie asked, to what extent will Netanyahu return to the Knesset or his office as prime minister?
Well, he's a member of Knesset now. He's the leader of the opposition. If the question is asking what's the likelihood, I've said many times, I think it's the most likely outcome. I don't think it's a foregone conclusion. He's struggling to get 61 according to all the polls, but he's a great campaigner. Likud really only started their campaign today. They had what was called a Bibi bus, where basically Netanyahu was on a sort of a truck and driven around parts of the country with the sides being obviously open but very protected glass. So he's going around the country. Obviously, you see scenes of flags and people shouting "Bibi, King of Israel" and all these sort of things. But I wouldn't, like most parties, the way it usually happens is when you're having an event, whether it's out in the streets or in an event hall or in a parliament meeting, you make sure that you have enough of your supporters standing outside to make it look like it's spontaneous, to make it look like there's a lot of support. So, we saw in, I can't remember where they went today, they showed pictures of it, and you saw lots and lots of people come out and greet Netanyahu. I'm not saying that none of it was spontaneous, but they're going to go mostly to places where they know they have strong support. They won't take any risks and have anyone booing or shouting anti-Netanyahu statements. But what the Likud is trying to do is trying to really sort of raise the atmosphere amongst their supporters, show that there's momentum of support for Netanyahu to return to Balfour, return to the premiership. And they will certainly be hoping that will happen. At the moment, they're still a couple of seats shy of that, according to all polls. But I think that they can, with a very good strategy, a good campaign, and Netanyahu has run some very good campaigns in the past, they can certainly make up that gap. If not, perhaps they can bring Gantz across. That may be more difficult because of the history there and everything else. And Gantz would ask for a very high payment, which would probably be first rotation. But again, if I had to put money on one outcome, it will probably be at this point that, that Netanyahu would get a 61.
Thank you so much. And Eric, sorry, one last question. Does the election of a new prime minister in England, Truss, who is pro-Israel, change the Iran negotiations and the ability to stop Palestinian statehood recognition at the UN?
Probably not, because the new Prime Minister, Liz Truss of the UK, is pretty much on the same page as the previous one, Boris Johnson, who was also very pro-Israel in relative terms. And the British have always been, let's say, of the Europeans, certainly the strongest towards Iran. against Iran, I should say. So I don't see the new prime minister taking a different stance on the JCPOA. As a former foreign minister, she'll be aware of all these issues. And certainly the UK is one of our better friends in Europe, certainly on the Palestinian issue as well as the Iranian issue. But I don't see them taking or staking a markedly different path than they have done over the last couple of years of the Johnson leadership.
Understood. Well, thank you so much. We've come to the close of our webinar and podcast. Ashley, thank you again for taking time to update us this week.
Absolutely.
For our viewers and listeners, please join us Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern for a webinar with Hannah Balcock discussing why and how the British media empowers Islamists. Thank you all for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful day.